Welcome to Help Me, I'm Poor, the money podcast that's more dystopian world than Dow Jones. I'm Ellie.
And I'm Claire. And each week we discuss how money shows up in our favourite pop culture, from the classic to the nostalgic to the contemporary. If you enjoy this podcast, please do give us a 5-star rating, review us and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us at Help Me, I'm Poorcast on Instagram and TikTok. You can also find full episodes on YouTube to watch.
So this week we are changing the tone a little bit. I feel like a lot of the episodes so far, we've been quite lighthearted. They've been about things that are quite humorous, but we are heading darker. We're going to dive into Common People, which for anyone that's not watched it yet, is the first episode of the latest series of Black Mirror. And anyone that knows Black Mirror knows that it is largely very dark and dystopian, and it's incredible. It's so well created and executed by Charlie Brooker. And just a quick spoiler alert, we are going to discuss what happens in this episode. So if you've not watched it and you want to watch it, then this is your warning to press pause and come back later. But before we get into the many, many things that I want to talk about in this episode, and there are a lot, I think it's worth quickly recapping it. And in this episode, we follow a couple, Amanda and Mike, who they're a working class couple. They are thinking about starting a family, as lots of families do. They're in America. And Amanda's a teacher. And we see at the start of the episode, she falls into a coma. We don't really know why, but at hospital, her husband, Mike, meets a sales rep for a medical tech company called Rivermind. And basically, Rivermind offers, the saleswoman offers this option to Mike that he can restore Amanda's cognitive function with surgery by getting Rivermind. But there are a few caveats. The surgery is free, and I think this is a key point we'll come back to, but they have to pay a subscription cost. It costs what she describes as a reasonable $300 a month. And so, desperate to get his wife back, Mike signs up, gets the surgery, gets Amanda back, and she's functioning. But then through the episode, we follow as Amanda is up and running, but has the issues that come with relying on a subscription service and the company that provides it to stay alive. And before we kind of get into the subsequent trials.
Do we have to talk about what happens next? I'm traumatized from this episode of TV.
I was going to say, what did you think when you first started watching this episode? Because I feel like when it starts off with the caveat that this is Black Mirror, and so we always know that it's going to be quite dark, it doesn't seem like it's actually that bleak, I don't think. I feel like in a way you're like, oh, okay, this is quite cool technology.
Yeah, and it's also Tracy Ellis-Ross. She's so charismatic.
Yeah.
She plays that role so perfectly. But I have to tell you that my experience of watching this was slightly skewed by something that I'm really afraid to admit to, but I'm going to do it, which is that if I think that something, a TV show or a movie, is going to scare me or make me feel uncomfortable, I will read the full plot on Wikipedia before I watch it. That's an exclusive. I know other people who do this as well. It's not just me. But so I actually read the full plot before I watched it. I know it's unconventional. But so I was starting watching it from the point of view of I knew what was going to happen. But I think that becomes apparent really quickly anyway. And I don't think that it didn't take away from the experience of watching it, in that I was still so bought into them as a couple. In a few ways, they reminded me a bit of me and my husband. They're so at ease with each other that I think they haven't got married that long ago, have they? They're sort of they're in their 30s,
I think
maybe
so.
mid to late 30s, but they seem to be newlyweds. I think they're still really celebrating their anniversary.
Yeah.
They're trying for a family. He's a welder.
Yes.
Which I think is really interesting. Just as a little aside, with all of these are near future dystopias in Black Mirror, aren't they? They feel too close for comfort. But I think the fact that their jobs are as a welder and a teacher, which are two things that AI can't do and probably it might start to interfere in teaching. And obviously there's like machinery around welding, but they are two things that, you know, they are jobs that probably will continue into the future with this like big AI revolution that's coming. But you know, they're very working class. Teachers in America, and then increasingly teachers in the UK, in actual fact, are not paid nearly well enough for the work that they do, but also compared to in Europe, where I lived in Italy for a year while I was a student, and I was an English foreign language teaching assistant in a school. And I remember having conversations with the teachers there about how well paid they were.
Really?
They were so, I mean, they were secondary school teachers. And I think that Amanda is an elementary school teacher. I think there is sometimes a pay discrepancy there. But I think, you know, the fact that we've got teachers who are struggling, like two working people who are struggling. They were obviously also already not particularly well off.
Yeah. You get the impression that they were just about making ends meet.
Yeah.
And then when presented with this option of, you know, bring your wife back to life effectively or not, then it's not really a choice. But you can already see from the start that extra $300 a month, because when Amanda is back conscious, I remember Mike, mentions, oh yeah, it's $300 a month. And I think her initial reaction was, how are we going to afford that? And that's just the start, as we see in this.
But I don't know if there's anyone who wouldn't pay that. Surely you would, as soon as that option is on the table. I know for me, like with my husband, if someone told me I had to find an extra 300 quid a month to keep him alive, it would be a no brainer. And you see that desperation. And you also mentioned the fact that the surgery was free.
Yeah.
And I think that is so crucial to it's such a clever way of showing that so many of these subscription models that really suck us in and like slowly sort of drain money from us on a monthly basis, the initial thing is free. So I remember I had like many years ago, I got a Nespresso machine and the machine was free, but I had to be subscribed to the Nespresso Club for like 18 months and it was like 18 quid a month.
It's like phones.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. Like, that was a much more obvious example. I
hadn't even thought of it until just then when you said that. And I was like, oh my gosh, obviously it's like what they do with phones.
Yeah.
It's like, here's a phone, but you need to pay 50, 60, 80 pounds a month for 2 years.
And you're committed. And like, I know the frustration that I feel like my phone, I've smashed my phone screen, Ellie. But my phone's not out of contract for another year. And I feel so like trapped by that.
Yeah.
Because I can't wait for it to be out of contract so that I can just fix the screen and go SIM only. But to know that you are then on something that you can't unsubscribe from, I think that already started to like really, I felt the anxiety like bubble up inside of me. We're both like financial coaches and educators. One of the first things that we would say to anyone who's struggling to make ends meet or who wants to like cut their costs is look at your subscriptions, see what you can trim, and this is the subscription that you can't quit.
Yeah, I think this is what is so scary and I guess hard about watching this is that like we're so used to subscriptions being something that is optional. You know, we say it all the time. Like you said, look at those subscriptions, but imagine that a subscription is literally what's keeping your partner, your husband, your wife alive. And the $300 a month, as we see in the episode, is just the start because Mike is working overtime. He's working really hard to be able to fund this, to make ends meet. And we basically see Amanda start to get more and more tired. And Gaynor does say up front, you know, that you might notice that she sleeps a bit more than usual because there's this like downtime for the servers. And it starts to increase and increase. And Mike and Amanda go back to Gaynor to speak to her and to say, you know, what's going on? Why is she sleeping so much more? what's going on. And we've also got the addition of the adverts, because we suddenly see these moments and they are so well acted. Rashida Jones actually talks about this in the interview that I watched. And the interviewer said, how did you go into that kind of like advert mode so naturally? And she said that it was from her experience doing voiceover adverts. And that when she first started doing voiceover adverts, that her instinct was that she should read them really quickly because it's an advert and you want to get them out of the way. And actually the advertiser said to her, that's the opposite. So what you actually want to do when you're doing an advert for it to be effective is to not change the pitch. You want it to sound really natural, because actually if you change the pitch, then people are alerted to the fact that something's up and they're like, oh, it's an advert. Whereas actually if you just keep talking at a normal tone and pace, it's much more natural and people will listen because it flows much more naturally. And this is exactly what we see her do in this episode. So when Amanda goes into these advert modes, it's just so seamless and it just cuts into her speaking, and it's so spooky because you can imagine it.
It's so, and I think again, like we're going into this era of like hyper personalization and where your ads are like, you know, I was looking at something for work the other day, for this podcast in actual fact. And, then one of the products that I'd looked up is now following me around the internet.
Oh my gosh, it's insane, isn't it? Like we're preparing to do some work on our house. And so naturally we've been looking at a lot of like different hardware and like various plumbing websites on YouTube. Every advert now is those companies that we've looked up once or twice. Yeah. It's wild how close it is and how we're literally being followed and tracked and listened to. And in this episode, the bit I love is where she's talking to the head teacher. Amanda's talking to her about this because there's been a complaint from one of the children's parents that she'd been advertising Christian values. And she's horrified. And then in the middle of this conversation with the head teacher, she starts advertising this over 50s dating platform. And the teacher's like, but I'm 49.
I'm 49, I know. Oh, and it is just, but it is just how, like, again, in this near future state, like that the ads could be tailored to the conversation, and that, you know, how dangerous that is in that conversation with her school people, who's talking about what's essentially like his mum is leaving a violent relationship with his dad, and then she is spouting this stuff about Christian family counselling, like an advert for that. And so yeah, it is very, I found that very, very poignant. But we were talking about the fact that the sort of the service is getting worse for the $300 that they're paying a month.
Exactly. And when they go into this meeting with Rivermind's rep, Gaynor, she effectively says, oh yes, well, you can get rid of those adverts if you get Rivermind Plus, which is an extra $500 a month. This service that you signed up to now is the basic version. And I mean, there's so many things here that are just so uncomfortable, but also so relatable, because I don't know about you, but my subscription services are not what they used to be anymore.
No.
Everything is shoving ads everywhere and you've got to upgrade. And obviously we're talking about Netflix and Amazon Prime and whatever. Here we're talking about a subscription that is keeping somebody alive, and we're talking about much bigger sums of money. But the principle's kind of the same. It's this idea that like the bar keeps on moving, and like what was basic is now kind of like subpar, if even available at all. And this only keeps going. So the next thing that we see happen in the show is they just about find that money to go for Rivermind Plus. But the way that they're funding that, first of all, we see Mike having to effectively humiliate himself online, which we can talk about as well. But then that again gets usurped by Rivermind Lux. And it's this constant moving of, I guess, the parameters that we're within. And I think what it really highlights is like this game almost, but it's not a game. It's a reality of capitalism. And the fact, ultimately, it's like you can never win, because how can you win a game where the rules keep changing?
Yeah, and there's a word for it as well. Enshittification.
Yes.
So like the slowly getting worse of things rather than, and I think it is this kind of like model. Lots of companies have caught onto the fact that it works better than just putting your prices up. So what you do is like you do just like phase out the cheaper one, or you make it so bad that it's unusable.
Yeah.
But then you can go to the next one. Because one of the reasons why they upgrade to Plus is the fact that they can't leave their state. They can't leave their local area, because Amanda will just switch off.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that, again, what I was interested not to see was like Tracy Ellis Ross maybe talking about the fact that it was in the terms and conditions or something, because we all sign up to these things without reading the terms and conditions. You know, they always sort of seem to have that to fall back on. And I think that like tech companies and things where things are like rapidly developing, like rapidly innovating, I think they get away with quite a lot in the name of like progress.
Yeah. And I think as well, like, I mean, I'm exactly the same. I'm so guilty of it. I just click accept on terms and conditions. And like, they know that we're not going to read them, because who has got the time? Like, we're so time poor, we're rushed, they're everywhere. Like, you accept the cookies, you say yes to terms and conditions. And half of the time we don't know what we're signing up for. And this actually reminds me of an episode from the previous series, Joan is Awful, where she basically says yes to a streaming platform being able to use what's going on in her life as content. And they make a point there of the fact that she signed up to the terms and conditions. When she tries to question it, they're like, well, you said okay. And she's like, well, I didn't see that. I didn't read it, because no one reads it. And it, you know, it makes you think like, oh gosh, is this going to happen to us? Or is this around the corner? But I think the thing that's so sad about this episode is that we see, you know, at the start, they are just about making ends meet. And this constant creeping demand, the pressure to upgrade, because also we didn't mention, but Amanda can't keep her job whilst she's on the basic plan because of these adverts. Like, she's threatened with losing her job. And if she doesn't have a job, how's she meant to pay for her subscription? It's like this cycle that she's trapped in of like, they've really got her over a barrel. But they are this hardworking, like really like seemingly like well-intentioned family, and they're stuck. And basically Mike is forced to effectively humiliate himself online to make money quickly, because he can't make enough money doing overtime. He's exhausted. Amanda, her server constantly keeps needing longer and longer to update. So she's asleep for like, I think at the end, she's like 16 hours a day. She's sleeping because she's in sleep mode. She's not actually asleep. And so she's not getting the rest. And it's this really like dark, I guess, insight into how people will go to, I guess, extremes in order to be able to fund things. Okay, I've got a quick question for you. When you picture somebody that invests, who do you picture?
Be honest, was it a man in a suit? A Jordan Belfort type? Navy gilet on his days off, maybe?
Exactly. And that's the issue that I want to talk about. Because for too long, the world of investing has felt like it's been built for people like them, not for women like us.
Which is why we're so excited that Help Me I'm Poor is partnering with eToro on their Loud Investing initiative. It's all about raising our voices and making sure that other women see that investing is for us too.
Loud Investing was born from a simple idea. If women don't see themselves in the investing space, then they're way less likely to feel like it's something that they should or can do.
Think about it. In finance films or shows, women are usually the wives, the secretaries, the girlfriends. The men are the ones making the big money moves.
And outside finance, we're often painted as the spenders, the ones who are racking up the credit card bills. Confessions of a shopaholic, anyone?
Exactly. But it's time to flip the script, because women do invest and we're good at it.
So let's talk about it. Let's be loud about it. Let's show other women from all walks of life that you don't need a finance degree or a pinstripe suit to take control of your money.
Get behind the movement. Let's make investing more visible, more inclusive, and way less Navy gilet.
Thank you so much to eToro for being our partner on Help Me, I'm Poor. To find out more, head to the link in the show notes and join us in raising our voices and investing loudly.
And just a quick heads up, all content on Help Me I'm Poor is for information and educational purposes only. It should not be taken as investment or financial advice, personal recommendations, or an offer of any kind. Always do your own research.
eToro is a multi-asset investment platform. The value of your investments may go up or down. With investing, your capital is at risk.
I think you're right. I think like if we take the rhythm mind thing out of it even, I think it's a really good portrayal of how much of a grind it can be and how much of a struggle it can be to feel like you are working and working and working and you're only ever like just about making ends meet or you're not making ends meet. There's a huge thing obviously because it's Black Mirror, it has to be something really extreme. So there are the like really painful scenes where Mike is having to do more and more extreme things on this sort of like kink website that's like OnlyFans but for humiliation.
Yeah,
like he's having to do more and more extreme things. It's so uncomfortable. You feel like so sorry for him. But if we take the Black Mirror kind of like malice, not the right word, but you know, everything has to be so like cutting, doesn't it? If we take that off it's like hustle culture, you know, the fact that one job is not enough. And so many people are finding this. There's massive stuff, all, you know, there's so much to go into, but all of the like side hustle content on social media, which so much of it is like really well meaning, but I like stand firm in my point of view that you shouldn't have to have a side hustle to survive. They should be for like extra things, or if you're trying to build a business on the side but you don't want to give up your job just yet, or you know, like you want a bit of extra money for stuff to enjoy. But increasingly we're seeing, as happens in the show, people are relying on like side hustles to pay their mortgage or to pay for their basic living costs. And I think, you know, if you zoom out from this, like this couple are going through a literal cost of living crisis. This is the cost of keeping Amanda alive, and that's what this is what they have to do to service it. And it is so bleak.
It is
like so bleak.
Yeah. And I mean, again, it's not the same extreme because it's not a TV show, but what it did make me think of is like, is there an element of like how a lot of us, particularly as millennials, feel that we see in this, in the sense that, you know, they were sold a deal in a way up front that looks like you get this surgery, you pay this amount per month, and this is what you get. And effectively, the bargain just changed. And I think, you know, for a lot of our generation, it feels as though we were sold a deal. Go to university, do well at school.
Say, it's the university thing.
Get a good job, and you'll be able to get a good house, and you'll be financially stable, and you can bob along in your career. You know, you can work hard, but not too hard, but you'll be able to get your family home and your holidays and maybe send the kids to private school. And that is not the deal that we have got. Like we are in a completely different reality because the rules have changed. You know, the economy, the governments, like successive decisions that have been made by people way higher than us with way more influence and way more money are having such a huge impact on our lives. And it does feel a little bit like there is a similarity there in like what we signed up to. We did all the right things. You know, Amanda and Mike got their good jobs, like they're working hard. You know, they thought that they were saying, okay, this deal will pay our $300 a month. And it's just not enough. Like, and we see it deteriorate. We see that they cannot keep up. You know, they are pushed to the extremes. And what's so kind of heartwarming is despite everything, they stick together. And they are in it through the thick and thin, but they can't keep up with the costs. And the basic package of Rivermind just keeps on going up. And like what you're getting for your $100 or $800 a month becomes worse and worse, like you said. And like they get to a point where it's like, is this like, this isn't really living, like, and it's so sad.
And obviously the kind of all is lost moment is where Mike's takes off his mask. So he wears a mask to do all of these like humiliating tasks. But then someone says they will give him $500 to take the mask off, and he thinks he can use that to like get a gift card for the Rivermind Lux thing and actually take Amanda away. They always go to this one place for their anniversary every year. They've had to miss it the previous year. And so he takes his mask off for $500, but then a colleague discovers it, shows everybody, pins stuff all around the place. And while he's confronting him, the colleague is like very severely injured in a workplace accident, and Mike loses his job.
Yeah.
And so they then go in and try to bargain as loyal customers. And he says, we're loyal customers. And like there's nothing that she can or will do. And I think lots of us feel really frustrated that we are loyal customers and companies don't give a shit. Like, I definitely can identify with that myself, but loyalty doesn't always pay. There are some companies where it does, but
increasingly like rarely though. I feel like there used to be maybe more examples of where if you're a loyal customer that you would get some sort of benefit from it, but especially like in the financial sector, I feel like often it's like the new customers that seem to benefit. And I know that there was relatively recently like the rules changed on this so that actually old existing customers have to be offered the same deals, but we see it all the time now that it's like customers are rewarded for switching company or to going to a new provider, and actually that loyalty, like if you just stay with the same provider of insurance or banks or whatever, like what are you getting for it?
Yeah. And just something that I thought while you were saying that is part of this a bit of a warning of like the danger of monopolies as well, because obviously Rivermind is the only, they can't go to a competitor.
That's so
Rivermind's
true.
the only thing that can do this, and but then on that kind of thought, maybe, if the ending doesn't go the way that it does, if they wait a bit longer, maybe there'll be some competition in the market and they might be able to, things tend to go in these waves. There's innovation, and the price is very high, then there's competition and the price comes down, and you wonder if they'd held on a little bit longer, maybe they would have, because not all companies are evil and bad, hopefully.
It does make you though think a little bit about like health tech and ethics, because I mean, there's just so much that we could talk about for days about like the ethics of technology and like, especially in the space of healthcare. And I think it's going to be really interesting, like as we see technology continue to develop, how that is managed, because ultimately there's this balance that has to be struck between, I guess, the companies making profit because they're companies and that's what they exist to do, but also, I guess, from like a regulatory governmental perspective, like trying to manage like the ethics of these companies and to try and protect consumers or patients, whatever we are, when it comes to using these. Because you would hope that in the real world that there wouldn't just be this ability for Rivermind to keep, I guess, downgrading the service and to keep increasing the price for the basic package as they do seem to do. I don't know, but maybe that's just naive of me or hopeful of me to think that there would be more protection around it.
Again, I think this comes back to the fact that you get a lot of leeway when you're innovating. If you look at the fact that, the big tech companies don't pay their taxes properly, like all of this stuff you get, and they have power and they can lean on governments. Most governments are very, very, very deeply in debt, and all of the wealth is with the private companies. And so the power, the government does have power to legislate and to regulate and to try and protect consumers, and consumers can try and protect themselves. But the power is all over the place, I think.
Yeah, it's so true, actually. And I think the thing that we maybe have a different perspective on here in this particular instance as well, compared to viewers in America, is the healthcare system and the cost of healthcare. And when I was doing some research around this episode and looking at how people had responded to it, that is what I found was probably the most stark thing. For us, because we have a health system which is relatively free to access, we have costs for things like prescriptions, but on the whole, the NHS is there and it is free to all that are at least British. The idea of surgery and a treatment that keeps you alive only being available if you have an increasingly high amount of money feels like really bleak, but it also kind of feels like, oh, well, we're not there yet. Whereas
we need to be careful though.
We do need to be careful with that. But I think that, for people watching this in America, where healthcare already is extremely expensive and you have to have a health insurance, otherwise you're left on the street. And the cost of health insurance and the standard of health care really depends on your premium. Like, I think it feels a lot closer to home from what I was reading. Like, they are actually kind of living in a version that's almost there, whereas we're maybe like a step or two behind that at least.
Yeah. And you were saying before we started recording about like the comparison that some people had made between this and like the fact that you have to pay more for like higher grades of insulin, things like that if you're diabetic. And I just, the trauma of a diagnosis is so huge anyway. Like I hope you won't mind me saying this, my husband was diagnosed with a chronic health condition last year, which is not like in any way life-threatening, but it has been life-changing for him. And I think, the processing that you go through with a lifelong diagnosis can be so traumatic anyway. The idea then of having to come up with the money to have your quality of life or to have any life is just, it feels so sadistic.
It feels as though it's a bit of a warning, I think, to us as to, where things might head. But I also think it's sometimes like a bit of a reminder that although there are many issues with the system that we do have, like we are also hugely lucky. And I feel like this, especially like over the last couple of years, like I have had so much interaction with the health service and I have not really had to pay for any of that. And had I lived in another country, that like wouldn't be accessible because I wouldn't have the money to pay for it. Or had I, like it would have at least cost me like a hefty amount in insurance, which it hasn't. So I do think that, whilst we can always hope for things to improve in the system that we have, it's also worth being like really grateful that we actually do have a health system that like is free to access whoever we are.
Yeah, 100%. Like I am grateful for the NHS all the time and we have got to protect it at all costs. And I'm worried about the future in that sense, but I try and like fuck it out. But I can't think about things like this episode of Black Mirror for too long. Otherwise, I just find myself really spiraling. But this is the only episode that I've watched in this series, but I've heard that there are some like quite hopeful ones in there as well. And I do think it's important that we like can try and see the potential of tech as well as its potential to like crush us all like tiny bugs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, innovation, particularly in health, is like incredible. Like there have been some insane things that have happened over the last like few months, even in the news when it comes to like developments with tech and with medicines and things. And so I do also remain very optimistic that there's a lot of good that can be done through technology and through science and tech.
I have to mention one thing that has just popped into my head, which is, have you seen that Elizabeth Holmes' partner is setting up an almost identical company to Theranos and is asking for investment?
What?
Yeah. It's like another like health diagnostic company.
Okay.
Like these people... Honestly, anytime I feel like I'm being like audacious, I'm going to remember those guys.
Yeah. I mean, Is anyone investing in that?
Don't know. Apparently it's just family and friends so far. We have to like put a pin in that and come back to it another time. But
oh my gosh. Okay. Well, that is a takeaway, is that, you know, if at first you don't succeed with your dodgy health tech venture, try again.
Yeah. But is that the lesson we want to take from this?
Probably not.
But yeah, I mean, before we wrap up, have you got any behind the scenes on this?
So I did read an interview with Charlie Brooker, who I mentioned earlier, who is the genius behind Black Mirror, which absolutely cracked me up, because he said that he got the idea for a lot of this episode. And actually this episode was intended to be a lot more lighthearted, and it was only as he started to write it that it became quite dark. But he had been listening to a lot of podcasts, and he got the idea for how Amanda goes into these advert modes from listening to podcasts and listening to dynamic ads and you know, this happens all the time when you listen to them. Suddenly you'll be listening and then a host will suddenly cut into an advert and you're like, oh, okay. And then they just
so
cut back
now.
Yeah. And they carry on talking. And it's like, oh, did that really just happen? And it made me laugh, because I was thinking, like, there's something very meta about the fact that we are on the podcast talking about how hosts do the adverts, and we are some of those hosts.
Yeah. Oh no, it's really interesting. I would have loved to see a light-hearted version of this. But I think, don't get me wrong, I think it's such good TV. It's really powerful. The acting is incredible from from all three main actors. It has like obviously a terribly, terribly sad ending, but I think as the episode goes through, you know that was the only way that it was ever going to end. And I think there's almost a bit of a callback, because obviously it ends in like what we assume is a murder suicide. And what I found really interesting was that when Mike goes into the room with a box cutter, it made me think back to right way back in season 1, I think, in 10,000 Credits, the episode where you know, in order to get the attention of the nation, Bing goes and holds a shard of glass to his own throat while he's talking, and then obviously that becomes his TV show at the end. But I was thinking, you know, there's such like a mirror there of sort of, it was something that stopped everything in its tracks in that episode, but in this episode it's potentially going to be used for someone's like enjoyment, or you know, you don't get the sense that it's necessarily going to be particularly shocking to people what he's about to do on camera, which is like very, very sad and depressing.
It is. But I mean, on that note, then I think that's probably all we've got time for. And I mean, are there any kind of takeaways that you've got from this? Like, can we find a spin on this that is positive about subscriptions? What are your favorite subscriptions?
Well, I've got a few things on subscription. I think I'm going to go away and reconsider them after this, to be honest. We have our early roll on subscription, which means I don't have to think about it. I have a Razor subscription, which I do pause every now and again because they sort of mount up in my cupboard. I do find it useful for like some things. I think we are sometimes in danger of getting like a bit of subscription overload. Yeah. And like the more you have, the harder it is to keep track of them all. And they're often like, they're not on like a direct debit that you can cancel. So you have to then like remember all your passwords to log in and cancel them. And so, yeah, I think my lesson is that I'm going to go review all of my subscriptions and also how grateful I am for the NHS. Long live the NHS.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for listening again. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. As ever, please do drop us a message at Help Me I'm Podcast, rate, review, and give us 5 stars. See you next week. Bye.